Hey everybody, I'm Stuart, and I'm so excited because we're starting a new series today called Happily Ever After and Everything Before. You've probably heard the phrase happily ever after before, like at the end of a fairy tale or a Disney movie, but that's not how we're talking about happily ever after in this series. For us, this is real life, and that's much bigger than any fairy tale. Sometimes, even in real life, we can have a happily ever after ending to something that feels like it breathes life into us. Just before I became a middle school student, our family moved from the inner city where we were living to the middle of nowhere. It was culture shock for me. I knew no one, I didn't have any friends, changing classes was a whole new thing. I made a terrible grade in a math class, and my parents were not happy. I really struggled with that transition. Life, Swifties, was not a fairy tale. So much so that when it came time to try out for the middle school basketball team, my dad decided it would not be best for me to try out. He didn't feel like it would be a good experience for me. Honestly, I think there was a part of my dad that thought if that didn't make the team, it would be an even worse thing for me mentally and emotionally. So I didn't try out. However, basketball was my happy place. It was like my security blanket. And every day in PE, we would play basketball, and I would just rule these guys. I dominated. And our middle school basketball coach was also one of our PE teachers, and he would watch me playing against these guys, most of whom made the basketball team, and doing so well. So a week after tryouts, after the team had already been selected, the coach called my dad and asked if I could play basketball for the school. And a few days later, without me ever practicing with the team, I found myself dressed out for the middle school team's first home game. Bleachers are packed with classmates, and the coach puts me in a few minutes into the game. And at that point, with all the stuff that had been going on with me at school, things could go happily ever after, the rest is history, or everything before. And fortunately, I played lights out. I played out of my mind. I can still hear the oohs and the ahs from my classmates. And even the teammates who were being really cold toward me, being rude because of the tryout thing, and they were right about that, were high-fiving me and wanting to be my friend after we had won, and I had more than proven myself. Honestly, and this sounds way dramatic, I think that was a turning point for me. And there are some days I wish I could experience the happiness of that moment over and over again. Even thinking back on it today, decades later, don't make a comment about that. It still feels like one of my top happily ever after experiences in my life. And that's why I think I love looking back on it. It makes me happy. And at the end of the day, isn't that something we might all want? You know what? I bet if I were to ask you to share your happiest moment in life so far, you'd be able to do it no problem. And on the flip side, what if I were to ask you to share about a time you had a 0 out of 10 day, a day you wished would never happen again? Basically, the exact opposite of happily ever after. You probably don't like the way it feels to even think about that, let alone share it. The thought alone might make you feel uneasy. Your palms get sweaty, or you might start shifting around in your seat, or maybe you feel a little bit queasy in your stomach, or your heart starts racing, or you can feel tears start forming in your eyes, or you find yourself looking at the clock wondering when this moment is going to be over. Don't worry. That's natural. It's a human response. Whether we realize it or not, we all get a little uncomfortable with feelings that aren't, well, happy. When you got that grade back and it wasn't high enough to pass, when you didn't make the team and you aren't sure how your friendships are going to change because of that reality, when your family is splitting up and you have really big feelings about that, when you're afraid to be happy because each time you think things are good, you're worried something awful may happen to ruin it all. Moments like that, they can leave us feeling anything but happy. And for some of us, we may want to rush right past them and forget that ever happened. Instead of feeling the unliked, uncomfortable, or unwanted feelings that come with them, we want to push them away and not feel them at all. And honestly, I get it. Happiness is a feeling we like, but The rest of those feelings, well, they're a lot more complicated. But what if I told you that those uncomfortable feelings weren't necessarily wrong? What if I told you that they're actually designed for us to feel? Rather than ignore them, what if we found a healthy way to really move through them? And what if I told you God created you to feel those feelings? To begin, we're going to look at the book of Matthew. The book of Matthew is found in the New Testament and documents a lot of Jesus' life. It talks about his birth, his life, and the ministry he did with his friends, the disciples. One of those disciples, Matthew, wrote this particular book of the Bible, and Matthew ate meals with Jesus. He traveled with Jesus. He spent a ton of time with Jesus. So when we read what Matthew records about Jesus, we can trust that Matthew's words represent who his friend and teacher, Jesus, really is. Today, let's look at something Jesus said that probably didn't make a lot of sense to the people he was talking to back then. Take a look. Happy are those who mourn. God will comfort them. Just so we all understand, to mourn is to feel or show deep sorrow or regret for someone or something. If you've ever attended a funeral, you have experienced mourning. And honestly, at first glance, Jesus putting happy and mourn together doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It almost seems like Jesus was saying that we can be happy and sad at the same time, or that experiencing a feeling like sadness or grief is actually a part of being happy. Now, how is that even possible? Well, we can't forget the second part of the verse. God will comfort them. The reason we can feel all those uncomfortable feelings, the reason we can find happiness even when we're in a really sad, really difficult, really hard season in life, it's because God will comfort us. But don't just take my word for it. All throughout the scriptures, we find real stories of real people who felt really big feelings all the time. And in their own experiences, we can see what it looks like to feel our feelings, happiness, sadness, and everything else that comes our way. Take David, for example. In the book of Psalms, he wrote this: I give you all the credit, God. You got me out of that mess. You didn't let my foes gloat. God, my God, I yelled for help, and you put me together. God, you pulled me out of the grave, gave me another chance at life when I was down and out. All you saints, sing your hearts out to God. Thank Him to His face. He gets angry once in a while, but across a lifetime, there's only love. The nights of crying your eyes out give way to days of laughter. When things were going great, I crowed, I've got it made. I'm God's favorite. He made me king of the mountain. Then you looked the other way, and I fell to pieces. I called out to you, God, I laid my case before you. Can you sell me for a profit when I'm dead? Auction me off at a cemetery yard sale? When I'm dust to dust, my songs and stories of you won't sell. So listen and be kind. Help me out of this. You did it. You changed wild lament into whirling dance. You ripped off my black mourning band and decked me with wildflowers. I'm about to burst with song. I can't keep quiet about you. God, my God, I cannot thank you enough. David was at a happy time in his life when he wrote these words, but even though things were going well for him, he still wasn't saying life was all great and perfect all the time. He was expressing a wide range of feelings all at the same time. Why? Because I think David understood that this was part of how God made him. It's part of how God made all of us. As humans made in the image of God, you are free to feel. And I mean really feel, like all the feels kind of feeling, because life is so much more than just one happily ever after. Think about it this way. Let's say you want to go from New York City to Los Angeles, California. What states will you have to go through to get to your destination? Think about all the big landmarks or major attractions you could pass on the way to get to this new location. You could go to Philadelphia and see the Liberty Bell. You could go from Philadelphia to Chicago and see the Bean. You could get to St. Louis and see the Great Arch. Or perhaps you want to take a detour there and go and see the Grand Canyon. You could go to Las Vegas, through the desert, get on Route 66, and eventually wind up in LA. Let's open up the GPS on my phone and plug in that destination now. Can you believe if you were to drive straight through, that it would take you 41 hours to drive from New York City to LA? 41 hours nonstop. Nonstop means no bathroom breaks, nothing to drink, nothing to eat unless you pack snacks. Straight through. And you would pass all of these other different locations to get there. The same can be true for our feelings. We may want happiness, which is totally fair, but we can't really get to happily ever after without passing through a lot of other feelings along the way. Anger, grief, fear, sadness. It's all a part of life, and it's all part of what ultimately helps us experience and appreciate the happiness that comes from the presence of God in our lives all the more. It's why you're free to feel, not just one feeling, but every feeling. Feelings mean we're human. They don't mean we're broken. You are free to feel anything because that's how God created us to be. And as Jesus reminded us, that's also how we experience the kind of happiness that only comes from God's comfort and presence in our lives. What I want you to remember today is that you are free to feel. And I think there are a couple of things we can do to step into that freedom we have to feel. First, start by noticing what you feel. Pay attention to what you're feeling as you're feeling it. Even if you can't necessarily name what you feel or why you're feeling it, notice what's happening in your mind and in your body. Don't ignore or push away feelings or responses that feel uncomfortable or scary or unpleasant. Second, think about who you can share your feelings with. Sometimes the best thing we can do to understand and process what we're feeling is to talk about it with someone we can trust, a parent, a guardian, your small group leader, an older sibling, or even a professional counselor or mentor can be helpful here. When you're not sure what you're feeling, or you're uncomfortable feeling what you're feeling, or you don't know how to process your feelings, reach out to someone you trust to talk about what you can do and really be free to feel. There may be some of you who need a safe space to feel those feelings today. Good news, your group is a great place for that. I'd love to encourage you to open up to the people in your circle today about what it means to know you are free to feel. When you head to group, I want you to ask yourself this question: what's one way I can be more comfortable to feel what I was made to feel?